infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Welcome to another episode of Into the Fray. If you're new here, I hope you're enjoying it enough to head to your podcatcher of choice to rate and review the show. This helps it aggregate across the listening platforms, which will turn into more people willing to come on and share their encounters. If you've been listening for years, I'd ask that you please do the same. Home base for Into the Fray is intothefrayradio.com. There you will find all episodes, blog posts, and get bonus content info. Speaking of that bonus content, on top of the free weekly show, I also produce bonus content for Patreon and Apple Podcast Premium. On either platform, you get all bonus audio episodes and early releases, each one ad-free, of course. Full disclosure though, Patreon has a bit more in the way of perks because of their interface. Over there, you will get video versions of patron-only chats, the private Discord channel, and merch at certain pledge levels. So head to patreon.com/intothefray or your Apple Podcatcher app to sign up for bonus content today. You can find me on the big three social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The Linktree link in each of my bios will take you to all the places you want to venture regarding ITF, including Small Town Monsters documentaries, various ways to listen to the show, Beyond the Fray books, contact info for me, and more. And lastly, and really honestly most importantly, if you'd like to share your encounter or encounters on Into the Fray, the best way to get in touch is by emailing me at shannon@intothefrayradio.com. And without further ado, let's get to the interview. On this edition of Into the Fray, author W.T. Watson is back. Now, he's been on several times to discuss his books on both Patreon and ITF main show, and today we are covering his latest release, The Forest Poltergeist, Class B Encounters, and the Paranormal. And as per the description on the back, I'm going to shorten it down just a little bit here, WT, but tree knocks resound, rocks are thrown, structures and nests are discovered, giant tracks are located in remote areas, and eerie cries echo through the woods. Sasquatch researchers attribute these phenomena to the presence of an unknown giant primate. But what if they are mistaken? What if something other than the forest giant is responsible for these encounters with an unseen force? WT, welcome back.
Thank you. It's so good to be back, Shannon. You know, I really went down the rabbit hole in this book, and I'm happy to have a chance to talk about it. One of the things that I want to mention before we get going really good, you know, the people who have talked to me about the book have been like, well, so, you know, you're firmly on the side of Sasquatch being some kind of a paranormal creature or something, right? And I take a much more nuanced approach. I am open to the possibility that there is actually a physical creature, a physical Sasquatch. As I've mentioned, you know, in the context of other books that I've written, you know, I live in Canada. There are hundreds of thousands of miles of wilderness area that's barely touched by people. we actually lost the wood bison up here, which is the largest land animal by weight in North America. We lost the wood bison up here for several decades. They thought it was extinct until somebody flew over a herd of them in one of the western provinces. If there is a place on the planet where Sasquatch could exist, a physical creature could exist, it would be Canada. It's the second largest country in the world, miles of shoreline, so on and so forth. And most of the population lives within 150 miles of the US border. So there's lots of open space for a creature like that. However, there are also, in my book, Sasquatch Canada, I did a whole chapter on strange encounters. There are also a subset of Sasquatch Class A, the visual sightings, subset of those sightings that are strange, where Sasquatch disappears, or there's mind to mind contact with the creature. Kind of, I think I titled that chapter "Strange Things," and that was one thing. So there's a subset of weirdness going on in the Class A visual sightings. And then we come to this thing that we're going to talk about today. There are people who are having these strange encounters out in the forest where they don't actually see a Sasquatch, but the activity that they're running into has been attributed to Sasquatch. Wood knocks, stone throwing, these structures that people are finding in the woods, and so forth. Another podcaster that I've talked to extensively proposed the idea that if you took all of that stuff and you put it inside a house, you'd have a poltergeist case. And I started researching poltergeist and realized that that's entirely correct. That every single thing that we attribute to Sasquatch out in the woods could also be poltergeist phenomena. And that was the kind of the impetus for writing this book.
And since you've already done the opening, what is a Class B encounter when it comes to Sasquatch, let's talk about what poltergeist translates into.
Okay, so poltergeist is actually a German word, which is usually translated something along the lines of noisy ghost or noisy spirit. Poltergeist style, and I'm going to call it a haunting for one better word, episodes, incidents, however you want to think of them, but poltergeist style hauntings are characterized by physical phenomena. In other words, the person who has a poltergeist infestation, we could call it that too, typically going to have sounds in the house. It often starts with like a scratching noise or maybe footsteps. Quickly escalates into physical phenomena where things are flying around. Poltergeists are notorious for destroying glassware. There is a case that I read where the people that were the victims of this particular poltergeist actually were taking their glassware out in buckets, like 3 or 4 buckets full of glassware that had been shattered by this entity or spirit energy, whatever a poltergeist is, we don't really know. In addition, there are some other things that are characteristics of both poltergeist and Sasquatch, and we'll probably end up talking about those later.
And something that stuck out to me is that renowned and well-respected parapsychologist and paranormal researcher Lloyd Auerbach, he says that, he does believe that there would be some cases in these quote unquote noisy ghost experiences people are having that the young people themselves, and this is, of course, this has come up, but I like his tag for it. He says that they are capable of having a psychic temper tantrum. I think that's a perfect tag for that whole subset of things that may be going on in some cases of poltergeist activity.
Sure. The theory, I think, actually originates with William Roll, who's another famous, who dubbed RSPK, recurring spontaneous psychokinesis. And the theory is, in these human-focused cases, that some individual in the household, and we're talking about poltergeists here, we haven't got to Sasquatch yet, but some people in these poltergeist cases, there's a person in the house who has very repressed emotions for whatever reason. There's all kinds of theories about that. There's abuse going on in the house. There's the typical roiling turmoil of being adolescent, but not all of the focuses, these people that these activities center around, not all focuses are actually teenagers or prepubescent children. There have been people in their 20s and 30s that have been focuses for these events. What seems to be the primary characteristic there is that this person, for whatever reason, feels that they cannot express their emotions outwardly. And the theory is that this results in them expressing their emotions externally by this psychokinesis manifesting itself around them and destroying the house and doing all kinds of things, rapping on doors and windows and rearranging things and doing all kinds of interesting stuff. I give a certain amount of credence to that idea. We certainly know that, from any number of parapsychological studies, that humans are capable of what's called micro PK, which is the ability to affect something on a statistically significant basis, but it's not like it's a small thing like the roll of a die or affecting random number generator. Those little effects have been shown, in my mind, to be proven by these studies that have been run by the various parapsychological institutes. When we talk macro PK, where a person seems to be able to move things with their mind without reference to any kind of physical touch or whatnot, then we get into more case by case and anecdotal stuff. So there's evidence for PK. There's evidence psychokinesis, the ability to move things with your mind. And I think that this idea of RSPK, this idea that basically the poltergeist activity in some of these instances is a psychic temper tantrum, is probably a pretty good theory. I don't think it explains all poltergeist cases. I think that there may be other things involved, but it's certainly a good starting point, and one that I think bears more attention.
And here's some of the activity that is covered in the book. And of course, each one of these has its own extensive chapter. And as you say, there's many references to the bibliography, other things that you guys can go down many rabbit holes. And we're going to be covering knocking and rock clocking, of course. Stone throwing is in the book, but that's just going to get an honorable mention here. Rearranging the environment, the tracks, screams, and apparitions. And of course, we're going to close with some of the explanations, which I think are particularly fascinating once you really start to think about it. You're like, maybe I didn't think about it that way before. So that's one of the things that make you go, But let's start off with comparing and contrasting knocking and rock clacking incidents when it comes to Bigfoot versus poltergeist. And one of the things that stood out in this chapter was the BFRO report, number 12100, as far as the Bigfoot goes.
Yeah, so this is a case that, of course, was reported to the BFRO. There were a pair of hikers who were taking a long and somewhat soggy 7-day hike. They were actually bushwhacking. In other words, they weren't actually following a specific trail. They were actually making their own path through Boise Valley, which is north of Pitt Lake in British Columbia. They stopped because basically they were soggy. They had been wet for days, and they made a small fire to help warm themselves up and dry their clothes. They hadn't been there for very long when they heard a strange noise coming out of the forest. And the way the witnesses described it, it sounded like two rocks being struck together. So that's odd because they're out in the middle of nowhere. But what was even odder was that the sound kept repeating at regular intervals. It would come like every 5 seconds or so and went on for approximately 10 minutes. Interestingly, as soon as this rock clacking started up, their dog, which I have always maintained that dogs and cats are psychic danger detectors. Their dog put his tail between his legs and showed absolutely no desire whatsoever to go and see what was going on out there, which was not characteristic of this particular animal. They thinking that there was a person out there, tried to contact, right? They called out into the woods. There was no response. The male witness, was all for going to check it out. Apparently, the female witness had had a previous Sasquatch encounter and flat out refused. She was like, "We're not doing that," and they proceeded to get the heck out of there at what they characterized as a fast walk. So they were apparently, whatever it was about this regular clacking sound spooked both of them and their dog, which would be characteristic of a Sasquatch sighting, but would also be characteristic of an encounter with a paranormal entity of whatever kind you would like to put in, fill in the blank with, including ghosts and that sort of thing. So it's a pretty common reaction from animals when they come across this kind of phenomena.
Yeah, and you compare that
So,
with table tapping and then table turning, right, in poltergeist cases. And
mhm.
is this something that with the regular intervals of the quote unquote rock clacking or wood knocking, whatever was exactly going on in that Bigfoot case and that BFRO report, is that the same? Does that parallel with table tapping where it would come in regular intervals, pardon me, in certain cases?
Yeah, I mean, if you'll recall from the book, I talk about the origins of spiritualism as one example of the rock clacking slash wood knocking kind of behavior, from the spirit side or the spiritualist side or the poltergeist side. For those who don't know, the Fox sisters in the late 1800s apparently established contact with what they felt was a spirit or a ghost in the home they lived. And this being actually communicated with them by rapping on wood, actually on a table. And, would do, they did a simple code where, one was yes, one rap was yes, and two raps was no. So there is a precedent there for sort of regular tapping that you that you that we're talking about in this rock clacking case. It is the case that, and I can say this pretty broadly about poltergeist cases, is that knocking on walls, knocking on tables, knocking on wooden surfaces, all those sorts of things are classic signs of poltergeist haunting. In the Hans Holzer's book Ghosts, speaking of wood knocking, he talks about a poltergeist haunting that happened at the Leupold farm, which is in Switzerland. And this farmer he kept detailed records apparently of everything that happened to him. And so there's a whole section slash chapter in Holzer's book about this particular haunting because this guy detailed every single thing that he found. One of the interesting ones from a poltergeist standpoint and from this wood knocking idea, the farmer and his wife were inside the house. There was a knock on the door, and they went to see who was at the door, looked outside, there was nobody there. Shortly after that happened, after they'd gone back in, settled back down, again, there was another knock on the door. The maid, who was in her room in the downstairs part of the house, looked and didn't see anything, as did the wife. Finally, again, everybody went back to doing what they were doing. Finally, there was a third set of knocks. And again, this was like the rapping that you would get on a door if somebody were knocking on your door to for you to come and let them in, right? This time the wife was playing it smart. She came close to the door, and as soon as she heard the knock, she jumped up, she threw the door open, and as she did that, she watched a piece of wood drop to the ground about a foot from the door. So this poltergeist, this invisible phenomena, whatever it was, had actually been using a piece of wood to rap on another piece of wood, i.e., the door, to produce knocking sounds at a regular interval, like you would see if you were knocking on the door to get somebody to admit you to. So it was very, yeah. I mean, it's one of those cross-reference type of things where everybody says that Sasquatch is out in the woods with a big stick banging on trees. Like, well, poltergeists are hanging around farms and banging on doors with pieces of wood. Again, you very much could attribute the one thing to the other thing, as well as to a giant bipedal primate. So,
Well, and the thing that stuck out about that one is, of course, that it needed, well, we assume, or maybe it just felt like using the piece of wood. I don't know. But in my mind, I'm kind of going, well, maybe it didn't have the energy. Whatever was on the other side of that piece of wood, it didn't have the energy to use its hand or claw or whatever, right? Whatever it was. Did it need the wood? Did it just feel like using the wood because it was more effective?
I mean, one of the things that you see in poltergeist cases over and over again is this sort of mischievous kind of attitude. I think sometimes that the poltergeist phenomenon does things just for the sheer unmitigated heck of it. Like, oh, hey, I'm going to pick up this piece of wood here and slam it into the door and see what happens. Or, you could be right. I mean, it could be a situation where the normal energy that was required to cause these rapping or knocking sounds on its own maybe didn't have that energy, and so used a tool. Either way, it seems to indicate some intelligence in the phenomena.
Oh, it certainly does. And I would hazard to say that the way that animals react in whether it's a Bigfoot in the forest, they're like, nope.
Mhm.
Or and I've heard it many a times on my show with people having activity in their homes. Sometimes the animal's going, nope, I'm going to go under this bed and you're not getting me out.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said, dogs and cats seem to have and I use dogs and cats because those are the critters that I'm most familiar with. I mean, it may extend to other types of animals. I don't know. Your ferret could be psychically sensitive. I have no idea. Or birds. I don't know. That would be more your area of expertise. But yeah, it's very much the case that in Sasquatch cases and in other paranormal encounters, animals seem to have a real sense for these dangers. Of course, if you're talking about a real live physical Bigfoot, Sasquatch type creature, obviously a dog or a cat or other creature like that would recognize an alpha predator like that in its area. In the same way, we don't know what kind of psychic sensitivity dogs and cats have. We just know that they seem to be sensitive to hauntings, to I mean, again, poltergeist cases and those kinds of things too. We don't really have an explanation for that other than theorizing that maybe they have a sensitivity, but it's definitely there.
Well, as you mentioned in that BFRO report, when the folks are kind of she's taking mental notes and going, I think it's time to leave. Especially for me, once your dog, when it's not characteristic of it to be on the nope list and he's out, he's not going to go check out whatever the heck's going on over there. That is when you do take a stock and you go, we are going to walk quickly out of this area. I think that was a good move by them.
Yeah, I mean, I have always said, and I've probably said in my books at some point or the other, I've always said that if you have that feeling that something's going on, that something's not right, that something's dangerous particularly, or just you have that feeling that something is not, I don't want to say malevolent, but it just doesn't gel with your particular mindset. Yeah, if you want to use the spiritualist vocabulary, if your vibration doesn't match its vibration, it's time to get the heck out of Dodge. I mean, it's all well and good to be brave and try and figure out what things are, but sometimes there are just things that you want to leave alone. And giant bipedal primates probably rank up there. So as well as whatever manifests the poltergeist phenomena, because it can do some damage if it wants to.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about a classic poltergeist and what we would all think of as a poltergeist, if you get one that has a lot of energy and maybe isn't so nice, yeah, it may be time to call someone or nope out of there. But next we are going to talk about rearranging the environment, and we are going to compare a nest, a structure, and this is a situation in Olive Hill, Kentucky, compared to the Black Monk poltergeist case.
Hmm. So we have in Sasquatch research, one of the things that people talk about all the time is, oh, I went into this area that's supposed to have tons of activity, Sasquatch activity, and I found these strange tree structures. I actually, in the book, uh, reference you to a website that actually has pictures of some of these things. And yeah, I mean, it is puzzling. It is puzzling. It's like, how the heck did these branches, these trees, get twisted into these particular shapes? How the heck, why in the world do we have like these nest-like structures on the ground that look like, basically like what a gorilla would make in the forest? And again, we may have a physical animal doing some of this stuff, but we also have the possibility that, that there are other forces at work here. In poltergeist cases, there are a couple of incidents that I talk about in the book. The first one, as you mentioned, Shannon, is Olive Hill, Kentucky. This was a case, again, a famous parapsychologist, William Roll, went to investigate. There, was a whole family. This is a funny case, though, because the poltergeist phenomenon started with the family's parents and then moved to the family. And the common denominators there seems to be the family's 12-year-old son who would go to his grandparents' house frequently to do chores and those kinds of things. The phenomena started there, and it got so bad that the grandparents actually moved. They actually moved house because they couldn't deal with all the weird stuff that was happening in their house. When they did that, the phenomena seemed to jump to the boys' home. So this particular incident actually happened on the 16th of December in 1968. Roll had sent a researcher to investigate, and this young man had seen enough interesting phenomena in the house to call Roll and say, "Yeah, you need to come check this out." So Roll is following the 12-year-old son, who is the focus of this particular poltergeist activity, into the family's kitchen. He's watching this boy as the kitchen table, and I'm going to quote here because this is what he said in the book. He said the kitchen table jumped into the air, rotated about 45 degrees, and came to rest on the backs of the chairs that stood around it, with all four legs off the floor. So he went on to state emphatically that he had had this boy in his line of sight the whole time. There's no physical way this child could have been responsible, but he was completely puzzled. Now, what is interesting to us from this incident is, that the poltergeist here seemed to be very much interested in rearranging its phenomena. It was always, knocking things off of the top of the TV and moving things around there. There's this particular instance where the kitchen table jumps up and it's positioned very precisely on the backs of the chairs with all four legs off the floor, so that it was in that particular position rather than sitting on the floor like it was supposed to be. There was also an incident that happened a little after this one where Roll and his assistant are in the room with the family when the coffee table, which is made out of a large chunk of wood and weighed something like, I think it was 45 or 60 pounds or something. It was not a light thing. Coffee table flipped over on its top. And again, the only person close to the table was the daughter and neither of the family, and neither one of the researchers believed that she was even strong enough to pick this thing up, much less flip it over on its top without them seeing her. So this particular poltergeist seemed to have a real desire to rearrange its environment. Now, if I take that and I translate it into the outdoors, what would that look like? I mean, it seems to me that a force that's capable of flipping over 60-pound coffee tables and even heavier items in other poltergeist cases, it seems to me that that particular energy would be quite happy to rearrange tree branches and bend trees over and make little nests and do all the kinds of things that are attributed to, Sasquatch. And again, I am not saying that there is no physical creature. I'm just simply saying that these reports have gotten so widespread and there is enough strangeness around the Sasquatch phenomena that we need to take we need to take a more Fortean approach to Sasquatch and look at all of the data out there instead of just the data from Sasquatch researchers who tend to be very, there's a bipedal primate out in the woods. So if we take this one, so we have this case where this poltergeist was very interested in rearranging its environment. If we go to the Black Monk of Pontefract case, this is one that I actually outline in some detail in the book. The Black Monk was a case that happened in the town of Pontefract, and it had an absolutely bizarre number of interesting phenomena that happened during the course of this haunting, for want of a better word. But in this particular case, or the thing that I'm thinking about, if we're talking about a case or a force, an energy that likes to rearrange its phenomena, in the Black Monk case, there had been the first day of the activity, there had been a whole range of things happening, from white powder apparently just materializing from a little below the ceiling in a room and just covering everything in the room, to spontaneous puddles of water manifesting for no apparent reason. They actually called the local housing council and they sent people out to turn the water off in the house and check all the pipes, and nothing. So there'd been all this crazy stuff happening. It kind of settled down toward the evening. The son of the house and the grandmother, they were home alone because the rest of the family was off on holiday. The son and his grandmother were going to bed. She came in to say goodnight to him, and as they're saying goodnight, he's looking over her shoulder at his dresser, which was starting to levitate, and actually they described it as dancing around the room. That was it. That was it for them. They were noped out there, and they decided they were going to spend the night at a relative's house that night. But again, we have an energy, and we see this over and over in poltergeist case. We have an energy that is capable of moving heavy objects, so tree limbs, tree branches, fallen trees, all that kind of stuff is certainly within its realm of possibility. We have an energy that's capable of moving things around, and it seems to like to move things around and rearrange things. I talk about another case that was also in Colin Wilson's book, Poltergeist, where the guy was a reverend and had a poltergeist outbreak in his house after they tried to have a seance in his house, right? And this poltergeist loved to create tableaus. It would take clothing out of closets and items off of tables and stuff, and set them up so that it looked like there was somebody laying in a bed praying and that sort of thing. Now, a force that's capable of doing that sort of thing is certainly capable of tree structures and nests and all of those kinds of things, if we translate it into the outdoors where it has less material to work with. So I thought that was extremely interesting.
I wonder if the researchers behind the movie Poltergeist, Little Miss Carol Ann and all of that, if they came across that case where it was the opposite, of course. In the movie, it was the chairs on top of the table, and in the actual case, it was the table on top of the chairs. But I wonder if that's where they got that from, if that's some iteration of that specific case.
It's entirely possible. I really have no idea. I know that I saw the original Poltergeist, but it's been decades. So I couldn't speak to that at all. I don't know, but it's entirely possible. And as I said, if you've read the poltergeist lore and poltergeist research, that sort of thing is fairly commonplace. They're always moving things around. They're always breaking things. They're always rearranging the environment. So I would be surprised if they didn't encounter this case or something similar.
I will say though, the original case sounds even more impressive, let's say, than the movie was made out to be, with the chairs on top of the table, to have the table flip up and over and then sit on top of the chairs the way it did, which it shouldn't have been able to do.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah, I mean, whatever this energy is, and I talk rather extensively at the end of the book about theories about what it could be, and we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But whatever this energy is, it's got a lot of force behind it, and it's capable of doing some really interesting things, and some things that could potentially be pretty dangerous. I think it was the Enfield poltergeist case. Don't quote me, but I think it was Enfield. There was a newspaper photographer who came in, who got in the way of a Lego that was flying across the room, and he got hit in the head. And when Playfair, the guy who wrote the book about it, and it's called This House is Haunted, I think. When Playfair got there a week later, the guy was still sporting a bruise on his forehead. Now, I mean, it could have been worse, but yeah, it is the case that these things, I mean, you can't draw rules about poltergeists. William Roll tried to do that once, telling a family that the objects that fly around in a poltergeist haunting never hit anybody, and he probably got hit in the back of the head with something. Didn't hurt him, but whatever this force is, it likes to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, it proved its point, right? It zipped him right up.
Mhm.
This
Yep.
next chapter was one of my favorites to go through, to choose what we might cover, and that is the tracks. And in this one, we're going to cover a couple different cases to prove a little bit of, well, not to prove the point, but just to point out a couple of interesting things to compare, right? So the first one would be Bigfoot tracks compared to some phenomena out of the very famous or infamous, whichever way you want to look at it, Bell Witch case.
Yeah. So when you talk to people about Sasquatch, particularly when you talk to researchers about Sasquatch, one of the things that they pop up with almost right away in most of these most cases is the track evidence, because I mean, my god, you have people like Jeff Meldrum out there who are making a career out of looking at Sasquatch tracks, and evaluating them for bipedal locomotion, and all of the ridge evidence, the dermal ridge evidence, and all that sort of thing. Very, very convincing stuff, right? Except that we have instances on the poltergeist side of the fence where this phenomenon seems to be quite capable of leaving tracks of its own. One of the most famous, as you pointed out, was in the Bell Witch case. Now, I'm no evidence on the Bell Witch case, or I'm no expert, I'm sorry, on the Bell Witch case. I was interested in this particular section of it, though, because I know that this phenomena, this entity, this force, energy, whatever you want to call it, basically plagued the elder Bell to his death. So John Bell Sr. had died. The interesting thing about this poltergeist type phenomena, the Bell Witch, is that it seemed to be able to communicate with the family. And in this particular case, the Bell Witch communicated with John Bell Jr., who didn't, he apparently was not in this spirit's bad graces, because it didn't haunt him at all. But he did have one particularly notable interaction with the poltergeist. The Bell Witch was speaking to Bell Jr. and told him to go to the window. And as the younger Bell watched, this poltergeist began to make footprints in the snow. In this case, the Bell Witch, this entity, force, whatever you want to call it, told him that the footprints that it was making in the snow would match the boot prints of John Bell Jr.'s father. Now, Bell, for whatever reason, didn't go out and take a look, but plainly reports that there were tracks being made by this entity. Just, there was something invisible stomping snow out there. So that's one circumstance of a poltergeist haunting where we plainly have tracks. I mentioned in the book, in the Black Monk case, there was this problem they kept having with water. Things kept getting soaked Water kept appearing from nowhere, basically. As the Black Monk case was beginning to wind down, the mom came downstairs one day and found that the carpet runner that went out to the front door was soaked. And as she stood there watching, footprints, bare footprints, began to appear in the soaking carpet going out toward the door. So again, we have a poltergeist making prints. Now, if we go back to paranormal research and ghost hunting and all that sort of thing, one of the old-fashioned tools, one of the ones that's been around for decades, that people use is this idea of putting flour on the floor. In the book, I talk about the Troush haunting, which again, it's a haunt from Hans Holzer's book Ghosts. This family had been, had a number of paranormal phenomena happening in the house. One of which was hearing footsteps on the second floor of the house. Now, as a quick side note, one of the things that people report frequently in Class B encounters, where they don't actually see a Sasquatch, is the sound of bipedal footprints, right? Or steps. So here we have, a poltergeist or a haunting. It's not really a poltergeist haunting, but there were some physical phenomena that takes the form of footsteps. We see this in other ghost cases where people hear, footsteps going up and down stairs and that sort of thing. This was happening on the second floor when all the family members were downstairs. There were two types of footsteps. They'd hear a heavier tread that they said sounded like an adult, and then a lighter tread that said sounded like kids running around upstairs. They, again, were having all the fun haunting stuff with cold spots and all that fun stuff, until Mrs. Troush, Carol Troush, decided that she was going to see if she could get some evidence for this haunting in her home. She went up to one of the second floor bedrooms, which seemed to be a place where they kept hearing footsteps. And she put a thin layer of flour on the linoleum floor to see if they could, see if anything happened. When she came back to check the flour, the spot that she had chosen had small footprints in it, just like the footprints of small children. Needless to say, her children were all accounted for, so they obviously didn't make the prints. When she made a comment that there were no children up there, but that the white flour had indeed been touched. This is a quote from Holzer. There were footmarks in the flour, little feet that seemed unusually small and slender. Next to the prints, there was a picture of a flower, as if the child had bent down and finger painted the flower as a sign of continuing presence. From the footprints, they took the child to be between 3 and 4 years old. And they also noticed as they were standing there looking at the footprints that they had that phenomena of things becoming supernaturally silent. So not only did this phenomena, whatever it was, this ghost, if you want to put it that way, leave footprints, but it actually drew them a picture. So again, we go back to that whole rearranging the environment thing. But I thought, and I go on to talk about other hauntings where there were tracks and that kind of thing in the book, but we have other things we want to talk about. So, but those are 3 good examples of how these so-called paranormal phenomena that everybody thinks of being very ephemeral and spooky actually had physical effects in their environment that included tracks.
I wonder if in the case of the tracks and the flower, if them being described as unusually small and slender was in relation to her own children, or that they were unusually small and slender in relation to, it shouldn't have been a human footprint no matter what age the human would have been.
Well, yeah, you do wonder about that. Holzer doesn't really say. One would think that she might have been comparing it to her own children's feet, but if they were unusually small and slender, then we could open a whole other can of worms and start talking about the fair folk.
Right.
Whatever force or phenomena was at work here, the important point is that it was capable of leaving tracks. And this is something that people ignore a lot of times. They think when you're talking ghosts, when you're talking poltergeists, or those kinds of things, that the phenomena that are attached to them are these sort of ephemeral things like EVPs and the electromagnetic fluctuations that you see in some of these situations, cold spots, maybe voices or those kinds of things, right? And in a significant number of hauntings, and particularly poltergeist hauntings, you have very physical phenomena that are happening. Something's making those tracks. And you can, if you look through the aisles of Fortiana, there are all kinds of interesting invisible phenomena that are producing really strange tracks. So it's not just about Bigfoot.
So I willingly skipped, and you know about this, of course, because I sent this ahead of time, was Screams and Apparitions, those two chapters. But do you feel like we need to touch on those more than an honorable mention before we kind of get into the postulations and theories of this whole thing? Because they are very important chapters. So that's up to you.
Yeah, I would like to just say that for folks who are more on the Bigfoot is a bipedal primate running around in the woods, who would come back at me after I said, "Oh well, paranormal phenomena leave tracks," who would come back at me and say, "Well, what about vocalizations?" There's a whole chapter on vocalizations too, folks. And it is very much the case that the poltergeist phenomena is capable of making a variety of different noises. And I propose some ideas about that as well. And I'm going to leave it at that because we do want to go on to other things. As far as apparition, I'm going to refer everybody to the bibliography of the book. There's a fellow named Tyrell, Tyrell, I believe is the spelling for his last name, who literally wrote the book on apparitions. He's the guy who came up with the various categories of apparitions. And he talks about how, he has just reams and reams of witness data about various apparitions. The one thing I want to note about apparitions is that a lot of people, when you say the word apparition to them, think of, the misty person in white who floats, across this floats down a staircase or something in a haunted house, and they're kind of transparent and you can see through them and that kind of thing. While some apparitions do take that kind of form, Terrell outlines a whole ton of other apparitions that were so real that the people who saw them thought that they were seeing an actual person. That, and I'm going to kind of leave it at that. They actually would wake up, for instance, and think that they were seeing somebody physical standing at the foot of their bed. And this thing was so real that if the entity passed in front of, or whatever it was, whatever an apparition is, passed in front of a light, it would blot out the light until it passed by the light. So apparitions are not, foggy, not always foggy, ephemeral, kind of spooky things happen in graveyards and on staircases. They can occur in somebody's bedroom and they can seem just as real as your eye standing there at the foot of a person's bed. And so this has a lot to do with, or it has relations into all kinds of paranormal occurrences, ranging from Sasquatch to dogmen to ghosts to aliens. Definitely a book that people who are interested in these phenomena should take some time to look at, because it'll really shake up your thinking about the way that paranormal phenomena manifest.
All right, so this gets very interesting. This is the possible explanations and theories section of your book, and right out of the gate, this kind of goes to what I was talking about, what Lloyd Auerbach was saying about the humans unknowingly or accidentally executing these events in the woods themselves. And you give a couple of examples of, and I can let you, if you wanted to expand upon these, you can, but you go from frustrated researchers to, camper A and B having a fight out there in the woods. And then these kind of events end up happening after that.
So if you're talking about we talked earlier about this theory of recurring spontaneous psychokinesis, that repressed emotion can manifest itself in the form of psychokinetic energy and move things around. In a poltergeist case, this is a common explanation that parapsychologists have for the poltergeist phenomena, is that there is a focus, a particular individual, whether it's a prepubescent child or somebody in adolescence, or in some of the older cases, it was a maid who was being abused. It's all kinds of different things. These people are not able to express their emotions, and so, as our talk puts it, they end up having the equivalent of a psychic temper tantrum. Now, if this happens in a house, what does it look like? There's all of the different kinds of things that we've talked about, from footsteps to banging on the wall or banging on the furniture, to things moving around, to crockery being broken, so on and so forth. But what happens if you take that and you move it out into the woods? If you have somebody, for instance, I use the example, for instance, of somebody who maybe has spent a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort with their group on Sasquatch research, and they have had zero luck, right? They've had no phenomena manifest at all. They haven't seen anything. They haven't spotted anything on their, they've invested money in, their infrared cameras and their night vision and all this stuff. They have all of this time and all this effort and all this energy and all this money invested in what they're doing. Maybe, the home life's gotten a little shaky because they've been a little obsessed with this, and, they're pouring all this money. Finances are a big source of friction in relationships, right? If you take that kind of a scenario and you take those people out in the woods and they're having another bad journey, another bad research event, it's entirely possible that if you have the right people in that group, you could set up the circumstances for this recurring spontaneous PK. And it happens in the woods. What's it going to look like? It's going to look like, something banging on trees or clacking rocks together. One of the classic signs of poltergeist activity that's written in just almost all the books that I've read is stone throwing, which is, of course, another one of those Class B things that everybody's like, oh, Sasquatch throws stones at people to get rid of them, right? Get them out of their area or whatever. It's also a classic poltergeist thing. It appears in almost, in almost all of the poltergeist cases where there are stones available to be thrown. There was one circumstance in Brazil where a fellow who took in the focus of a poltergeist event actually recorded the number of stones that hit his house, and there was something over 200 stones that hit his home. So if you had this PKs, this psychokinetic activity happening out in the woods, you get wood knocking, you get stone throwing, you get things moving around, you get footsteps, you get all the kinds of things that you would associate with a classic Class B Sasquatch encounter, right? Only it may be that all of this stuff is happening because of the frustration of the people who are looking for this thing. But it becomes a feedback loop, right? So they have these experiences and they get all jazzed up about Sasquatch, and they start the cycle over again. And again, I'm not pointing at any particular person or group or group of people or any of that stuff. I just propose that this is something that could happen because Sasquatch research cannot be entirely frustration free. And if there is a frustration level in the research, then this idea of RSPK is something that could certainly account for some of the activity that people see out in the woods.
It does make you wonder, because then does that mean that when we're in the city or in our homes, it acts like a Faraday cage in a way that would, because as you say, right, you might have this perfect, and sometimes it can be this situation where you're going, what's the perfect recipe? Is it this one man with this, and this whole team together, and take them and put them in a house and they're frustrated? That may not happen. But if they go out in the woods, maybe it's them plus, this equation comes through, plus the naturally occurring substrate, or there's lime out there or granite out there,
Right.
and then it becomes this perfect storm.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why I think it's probably not as common as some other types of haunting, for instance. Because I think that you have to have for this RSPK theory to be true or to be operant. I think that you have to have kind of that perfect storm of a person who has this innate ability kind of hiding in the back of their minds, the necessary frustration to that would cause this to boil over. There may be environmental factors ranging from they're sitting on top of a junction of ley lines to they're sitting on a crystal formation or I mean there's any number of things that could contribute to what you call the perfect storm that could then result in activity happening around them. But it's certainly an interesting idea. It's not the only idea that I put forward in the book, though. There's all kinds of different. I spend probably the last half of the book talking about all the different weirdness stuff that we could do, that we could talk about, that could be at least partially responsible for some of the Class B stuff that we have happening out in the woods.
Absolutely. And this is something that's come up on, I'm sure, every paranormal podcast out there. And these are thought forms. So before we get into that, though, what is a thought form?
So, a lot of people use the expression tulpa. I'm not wild about that because tulpa is a very specific entity created through meditation in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So I like to leave it in Tibet. But a thought form is actually it is a paranormal manifestation, for want of a better word, that is created through the focused intention of a person or group of people. I talk about Dolores Ashcroft-Nowicki's book, Magical Use of Thought Forms, and she is a practitioner of ceremonial magic. Talks about how you would actually do this. And the things that according to her are necessary for creating a thought form are desire, imagination, and visualization. Basically what it means is that you have to have a group or a person or group of people that have a very one pointed focus on a particular thing. They have to be able to visualize that thing, and then they have to have the necessary energy to pour into this thing to basically bring it to life, right? Thought forms called a lot of things magical circles, but thought forms kind of a good overall representation of the thing. So when we're talking about Sasquatch, you have literally hundreds, if not thousands of people who are very focused on this creature. You have a very specific idea of what this creature looks like and how it acts, right? Because over the years of doing research and so forth, people have developed these ideas about what a Sasquatch looks like and where what it does, how it acts in the woods. And then you have again, all of these hundreds, if not thousands of people pouring energy into their belief this creature exists. You could draw a parallel with the Slender Man thing that happened a while back, where you had a whole bunch of people who created this thing, who invested it with all of this horror and, basically brought it to life for some people at least. We have an even more settled and defined community of people who are looking for Sasquatch. And I think it's entirely possible that in some instances, the thing that people are seeing in the woods, going back to apparitions, and the thing that is causing these Class B phenomena, the knocking and the stone throwing and the footsteps and all those sorts of things, may actually be a thought form that has formed by this this intense concentration on this particular cryptid. And a lot of people think, well, thought forms, what's that going to do? How is that going to physically interact with an environment? Then we can go at something like the Philip experiment, where a group of people, a group of very smart people, got together and decided that they were going to try to create a ghost. And they wrote a backstory for this thing, and they spent a lot of time in simulated seances. Interestingly, they didn't get much result until they were about to give up, and then suddenly this artificial spirit, if you want to call it that, manifested itself, started doing the classic rapping on wood to communicate with the people. And interestingly, not only did it communicate the backstory that they had given this artificial being, it also began to riff on that and to create part of its own story. One of the things that you find in magical lore about thought forms is that people who create these things deliberately create them with a shelf life. This being is being created to do this task for this period of time. It has an expiration date, and then it dissolves back to its component forms, right? Component parts. These thought forms that may be created by people's concentration on a cryptid, for instance, don't have a shelf life. So, one might see them begin to evolve over the course of time, which could be really interesting.
And this was a quote that got put in the ITF on Patreon Discord, and it wasn't in relation to this conversation. It was in relation to just thought forms in general. But my friend Jake Dressel, I asked him I said, I missed that. I glanced at it, but will you resend me what you said in the Patreon Discord about thought forms? And because I just found it to be very interesting, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this. This is what Jake says. Jesus, Santa, the Easter Bunny, the Virgin Mary, I would say more thought and energy, possibly psychic energy, are collectively put into those four than any others worldwide. That's why tulpas don't make sense to me. No one reports a fat guy in a red suit running across the road or a blue-eyed Jesus standing on the side of the road as they are driving by, but I'm expected to think that Slenderman or Dogman is a tulpa from the collective human consciousness. That just doesn't make sense to me personally.
Just right off the bat, there actually have been reports of a fat guy in a red suit flying around. I actually heard somebody talk about a book that I think Tobias Whalen's book of high strangeness for the season. I can't remember what the title of it was, but those kinds of things actually have happened. If you follow other podcasters, there have also been reports of things that look suspiciously like the Easter Bunny. So I think that, yes, it's true that those particular, in the blue-eyed Jesus thing, I mean, people see apparitions of Jesus all the time, so I don't know where they're getting that from. What was the other one?
The Virgin Mary and the Easter Bunny.
There have been numerous apparitions of the Virgin Mary over the course of time. So I think that this person's argument is fundamentally flawed. Now, it may be that, these things aren't appearing as often as you would think, given the amount of energy that goes into them.
Yeah, I think that's what he's getting at. Because I have had people that have seen something that you would label as Santa Claus. I have had people on like that. But yeah, I think that's what he's getting at, is that collectively, there's quite a few sightings of something like a Bigfoot, right? And there are lots of sightings of ghosts and things like that. And I think that he's just kind of getting at, especially I would say, when it comes to Jesus, something, a religious figure. I do agree that there is more thought and energy put into those images than anything else on the planet. And I think he's just kind of getting out, those should probably be cited more if, as a consciousness goes, that we could actually then push that forward into something that we could actually look at or record or see, maybe on a more recidivist level than we do. I think that's what he's getting at, because I know he has heard those. He knows that they're out there. He's a really bright guy, but I think, I mean, in a way, I do agree with that, what he's saying. But I also agree with you in that there's probably more than one thing going on with any of these things.
Yeah, exactly. The the thing that I would say in that particular regard is that we know how this works. You know, I mean, when it comes right down to it, we don't know how it works. We don't know why, for instance, focus on, or even if it works, I mean, thought forms is a theory. Now, there are people who believe that they can actually form one of these things, and I've talked to people who believe that they could form one of these things, and that felt that it worked for them. And so, I mean, I can't argue with that because I can't say one way or the other. Oh, yes, I'm looking at you psychically, and I can see your thought form following you around. The other thing that I would point out, not only do I not understand how it works, is that not all thought forms take a visual form either. A lot of people will, in chaos magic, for instance, a lot of times they'll just form a ball of light in their mind and actually put the desire, whatever the desire is, whatever it is they're trying to manifest, into this thing, and then let go. It doesn't necessarily have a form. When we're looking at Bigfoot and Dogmen and Jesus and the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus and all those things, the other kind of distinction that I would make here is that a lot of people believe in Bigfoot, a lot of people believe in Dogmen. Not too many people believe in the East, or Santa Claus. When you get to the religious figures, that becomes problematic. But as I pointed out, there are tons of apparitions of the Virgin Mary. I mean, if you go online and start scoping Catholic websites or whatever, there's all kinds of people that believe they've seen the Virgin Mary. Same thing with Jesus. And who am I to say that they didn't actually see that? So I think there's probably a belief kind of form to the thought form thing too. You have to actually, there must be some belief component there. But again, this is a theory. We don't know how it works really. There are people that claim that they do, and more power to them. If it works for them, that's great. I haven't ever actually tried it, so I can't speak to it one way or the other. But I mean, it's one theory of many theories that is a possible explanation for some of the stuff that's going on out there. Because as I said, if we go to things like the Philip experiment or whatever, they actually got physical phenomena out of that artificial spirit, or perhaps a actual spirit was attracted by all the attention that they were paying to it, and then we could go down another rabbit hole. So, yeah, I mean, we the thing that I always point out in these circumstances is that we really don't know. We can theorize until the cows come home. We can have some favorite theories, but in the end, it could be what we're thinking. It could be another thing. It could be a whole bunch of things. And I tend toward the whole bunch of things explanation because I think that there's more than one thing operant that's making all these weird things that we talk about all the time happen.
Yeah, I find thought forms absolutely fascinating. And I was actually very happy to see it in the explanations, postulations section of your book. I think it was very important to include that in there. So
Oh yeah.
also mentioned, and these are honorable mentions, which means they have their own chapters, but we're going to save those for the readers. For our purposes today, is the FRAY and demonic entities are also covered as possible explanations. But the one that to me is probably the most fascinating, to be honest with you, because people can stay behind in a home if they seemingly choose, or maybe they don't choose. They're just stuck for whatever reason. If they can do that, why wouldn't they or shouldn't they then stay behind in a swath of woods that they love?
Exactly. And I actually created a little story about that in the book. But, let's just back up for a minute. We have seen throughout this discussion, and you will see if you read the book throughout the book, obviously we have the poltergeist hauntings, which are, physical to the next level. But in regular hauntings, which are, you know, again, we don't even know what a ghost is, really. We have theories about what a ghost is, that it's some part of a person that is left behind after their physical body dies. But we don't really know what that is. What we do know is that there are hauntings, that there are, people who experience phenomena in their homes or in buildings where they work, or those kinds of things, which run a wide gamut of things. But you read something like Rosemary Ellen Guiley's, uh, a great loss to the paranormal community. But if we read something like her book on ghosts and spirits, you read some of these hauntings, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff that happens in haunted homes or businesses or buildings or whatever. And again, you get the footsteps going up and down the stairs. People hear the sound of weapons clashing, so you probably got some kind of an image going there. You hear voices, you see, you get that phenomena of footprints appearing in flour, for instance. She records instances of that happening in more than one haunted location, on and on. So there's all these physical and sound phenomena that seem to circle around hauntings by what we'll call ghosts, just for the sake of clarity here. So if you take, and of course, the theory, that arises from spiritualist circles and so forth, is that either these people have unfinished business that they need to accomplish here, or they're particularly attracted to or attached to a particular place. They don't want to move on, or I mean, there's all these theories that people put out about why ghosts stay where they stay. I talk about the possibility that some people may actually decide that they're going to stay in a particular location. There seems to have been a tradition, more ancient times, of people choosing to be buried in a particular place so that they can safeguard this sacred site. They act as guardians for that particular area. So in the book, I posit the idea that of this fairly young man who is very much at home in the forest. It is his place. It is his comfort zone. It's a place where he feels best, and does his best thinking, and all of that sort of thing. He's very attached to that particular area. So let's say that this person passes on, has a car accident, or some other event where they have a lot of energy still left in their body, and they decide that they're going to go to the place that makes them happiest, and they go to their forest, wherever that might be. Their place that they enjoy hiking and traveling, and they're blissfully happy there. They become part of the forest ecosystem, basically, of all the other critters and spirits and whatnot that would occupy a space like that, until the day comes that somebody comes in, like a logging company, for instance, comes in and starts clear cutting part of that forest. You might have a situation where you have a human haunting in a forest that takes on poltergeist kind of activity, where the people who are doing these things are actually seeing apparitions, or maybe not so much apparitions, but seeing or hearing footsteps in the forest, getting the wood knocks and whatnot, as this spirit's way of trying to scare them out of his woods. And as long as these people are active, this spirit might be active, and it might be accumulating energy from the fear emotion that it's causing people. And so we get kind of a feedback loop there, where it's scaring people, and it develops more energy, becomes stronger, and keeps doing these kinds of things. rearranging the environment and basically acting out like poltergeist, especially as it gains more energy. So and the spirits of human beings have been credited with doing all kinds of interesting things throughout the folklore. So again, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. It's a theory, just like RSPK is a theory and thought forms are a theory. The idea that there might be human spirits that are responsible for some of these disturbances is also a theory. And then all of these things could be true. And that's the fun part about doing this kind of research.
The theory I really like is like it's everything all in one. You have the RSPK, you have someone that's really sensitive, and they pass, and I'll add this in there, and they're I mean, diehard Bigfoot researcher, and they're a little ticked off because they haven't really gotten what they wanted, right? So let's mash all that in together. They unfortunately pass away, and they had their favorite swath of woods does have, as you say, ley lines, or we've got granite or lime, all these other theories for quote unquote hot spots. I mean, then you've got living researchers going out there going, this is a Bigfoot hotspot just out of heaven. It's just a passed on Bigfoot researcher totally screwing with them.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's entirely possible that you have all of these things having a sort of a synthesis, blending together to cause these disturbances and other things. There may be, you mentioned the Fae and demonic activity. I don't give much credit to demonic activity as a Sasquatch Class B kind of thing, and I explain that in the book. But the Fae are a classic example of a spirit form from folklore that could definitely contribute to these Class B encounters that people are talking about. I mean, these are spirits that tend to live, tend to favor wilderness areas, and they're well known for producing poltergeisty kind of activity. So, you may have a situation where, if you want to extend your theory a little farther, you have this perfect storm of stuff around a human being, and it attracts other spirits that contribute to the fun, right?
Right, the trickster element. They're like, hey, look at the party over here.
No, it's like, dude, look at all that energy over there. Let's go see what's going on, And next thing you know, you got the fair folk partying with you too.
Oh, man.
So
imagine going to those woods for a night. Oh, you'd need a diaper.
Oh, yeah. It could get really interesting really quick because the fair folk are notorious for what? Shape-shifting. So you don't know what the heck you might see out there.
Well, it's something that you brought up early on, which is spot on, is that, and it could be even a flesh and blood Bigfoot or a Fae, or, let's go with the classic, a human ghost that stayed behind. In at least some cases, or I'd hazard to say many cases, there seems to be delight in their execution of some of these actions against the people that go out there. Maybe they're hiking, or maybe they are out there for Bigfoot or whatever. There seems to be some entertainment purposes on their side.
Yeah, well, think about, I mean, you've been a part of, small town monsters stuff, and they go out and they go looking for Sasquatch all over the place, right? I mean, there are just tons of documentaries that they've done now that are on YouTube and so forth. You get these guys, these people. I mean, a lot of time guys, but I mean, there are women who are really into this too. That go out, they're looking for Sasquatch, and they have these experiences sometimes, but the experiences tend to be very it's almost a come hither kind of thing. It's like, I'll hear a wood knock over here, and I'll go chasing off in that direction, and then there's rock clacks over here, and I go chasing off in this direction. So you get people wandering around crazily in the woods in the middle of the night looking for Sasquatch, right? I mean, you gotta think that sometimes, at least, there's some intelligence, whatever you want to call it, It's just messing with people. You know, it's like, oh, this is really fun. If I make a sound over here, then people go running over here. And if I make a sound over there, then they go running over there. And if I drop rocks on their heads, then they get freaked out and they run inside the house or whatever. They're out there with their cameras trying to find me, but I'm invisible. you know so there is definitely an element of mischief both in the poltergeist activity. We see it all the time, poltergeist activity, but also it seems in the in the Bigfoot Sasquatch world too, where it seems like people are doing just enough stuff going on to keep them doing this, right? And then some of them do end up having classic sightings, and again, I don't want to discredit the idea that there might be an actual creature out there or creatures out there that are causing some of this mayhem. But it's also, as we've discussed over the course of this entire hour, there's also a lot of other things that could be going on. And some of those things could be, I talk about the trickster at the end of the book and how it could just be a spirit messing with people.
I mean, we do look like goofballs out there sometimes, so no matter what is doing these different pokings out there in the woods, God bless them. I can't blame them because we do look a little goofy sometimes.
Well, I mean, I talk about Dr. Meldrum in the book. And, I have nothing but respect for the people that are doing that research. The people that are out there every day or every weekend or, every other weekend or whenever they get out there to do their stuff, they are devoting an enormous amount of time and effort and money to this search. They're passionate about it. And I respect passion. I think it's great. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't have a passion for it too. I don't get out in the woods as much as I'd like, but I'm still interested in seeing what other people are finding, right? So I have a lot of respect for Sasquatch researchers and what they do, and I just think that kind of in conclusion, or my concluding idea here is that I think that the folks that are doing these investigations need to take a more Fortean approach and look at all of the weird stuff out there and say, hey, that weird stuff is like our weird stuff. I wonder if that could have anything to do with what we're seeing out here. The problem that I see in the paranormal in general is that people get so siloed into their particular area of research that they don't look at anything that happens outside of that. So you got the Bigfoot people over here, and you got the ghost people over here, and you got the UFO people over here, and ne'er the twain shall meet. Nobody talks to anybody else. Some of those folks think that the other folks are crazy, but they if they stopped and backed out and took a more 10,000 foot approach, they might find there's some really interesting stuff in the other areas that they haven't explored. I mean, I've done the research on poltergeists and tried to remain focused on that. But I mean, if you start to investigate for phenomena as a whole, I mean, again, you end up with a 2 or 3 volume set book. There's just so much here that it was difficult, as I said, to be concise in writing this book, which is what I strive for.
I think with Quato from Total Recall probably said it best. He said, "Open your mind." We need that. We need that hovering overview and just take it all in and not be so closed-minded. So there you go. I'm with you on that soapbox, WT. That's for sure.
Yeah, no dogma, no dogma.
Yeah.
It's like, because I mean, you can't prove any of this stuff. And even if the Sasquatch researchers hauled the body out of the forest tomorrow, it still wouldn't answer all the questions around this phenomenon.
Right.
Because you have a certain percentage of encounters that just aren't explainable by physical means. The people, Sasquatch is getting shot with shotguns and disappearing in a flash of light. That physical creature doesn't do that. I don't care how much infrasound they have. That just doesn't happen. So I mean, again, I am perfectly okay with the idea that there might be a physical animal out there somewhere. But I don't think that's all there is. And I'm going to leave it at that.
So, this edition was the Forest Poltergeist, Class B Encounters, and the Paranormal. It is available now, but by this time, WT, I mean, you've got quite the lovely list of nonfiction books that are available. So let everybody know where to find the Forest Poltergeist, and please mention at least the other books and a little list and brief summary of what they are and where to find them and you online if you choose to do so.
Okay. So, yeah, I've been kind of busy in the past few
I'd say
years.
so, yeah.
All of my books are available on Amazon, and they are available as either paperbacks or Kindle. If you happen to have Kindle Unlimited, you can read to your heart's content because they're all available on KU. My past books include Black Dogs, Walkers of the Liminal Way, which was my first nonfiction book. It was about the Phantom Black Dog apparition and my discovery that this thing that I thought of as being only in the UK or Ireland, those kinds of places, is all something that is well known in Central and South America, and also in Canada and the U.S. My second book is Mysteries in the Mist. I'm sorry. It was Mist, Fog, and Clouds and Paranormal, which has some absolutely mind-blowing stories in it about everything from cryptids to UFOs to time slips. It's one of my favorite books that I've written because there's just so much weirdness in that book. It's just insane. Canadian Monsters and Mysteries goes on from that point. I moved to Canada in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, which was an adventure all of its own. And as soon as I got here, I started thinking to myself, hey, I wonder what kind of weird things I can find in Canada. And as it turns out, there's everything from lake monsters to giant beavers to UFOs to, I didn't cover Sasquatch because it was such a wide topic, but there's a whole lot of other things in monsters and mysteries, including, like spontaneous fires and all kinds of other interesting Fortean phenomena. So that's one to look at if you're particularly interested in Canada too. Fourth book was Sasquatch Canada, which is an overview of Class A, the visual sightings of Sasquatch creatures in Canada, excluding British Columbia, which is a huge hot spot in which you could write your own book about. So it's all the other provinces in Canada. The only place that I didn't find any Sasquatch encounters was Nunavut, and that I think is probably more due to the sparse population there than anything else. And it may have something to do with the First Nations people there not being particularly forthcoming with their Sasquatch sightings. But again, all of my books are available on Amazon as either paperback or a Kindle. And, I definitely appreciate the support that people have given me over the years. As far as getting hold of me or following me, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. On Facebook, you can follow the W.T. Watson author page, or if you want to follow me personally, I'm Will Watson. On Twitter, I'm at W.T. Watson2. And on Instagram, I have an old handle that I still use. It's Curanir, CURUNIR60. But if you search under one of my books or my name or something, you'll probably find me that way too. So, and I'm always happy to hear from readers. I occasionally get people who write in with sighting reports and stuff. So I'm not unhappy to do that, to look at those things. So.
Well, I will make sure to link all of the books, how to find them, how to buy them, and all of your socials in the show notes for this episode at intothefrayradio.com.